and welcome to Jolene Knits a Lot. This is a show about knitting, possibly crochet, maybe some other crafts. Today we have a bonus cocktail, so welcome and thanks for joining me. My name's Jolene, and as the title of this show suggests, I do in fact knit a lot. I knit whenever I have a spare moment. In fact, there's a saying that says, if I'm sitting, I'm knitting, which is actually fairly accurate for me. Today I am wearing a sweater that I made. This is the Felix Pullover. It's a pullover by Amy Christophers. I knit it in Brooklyn Tweed Shelter in the homemade jam colorway. This is a great sweater. I would say it's a great advanced beginner sweater. The sweater uses some lace to do increasing and the shaping for the sweater. Other than that, there's just some knit two togethers or slip knits to shape the sleeves, and you're off to the races. So if you've been knitting a little bit and you've done a little bit of lace, or if you're a fairly confident beginner, I'd say give the sweater a try. It's a really cozy sweater. I knit it in a size, it's a little bit bigger than my actual bust size. That's called Positive Ease. And I made it that way because I wanted it to be kind of fit like a sweatshirt, something cozy that I could throw on over t-shirts or over a dress maybe and just be really comfy. And I feel like I was really successful in that. The yarn I used is great for this sweater. It blooms up really nicely so that while the sweater is knit at a bit of a looser gauge than you would normally knit using this yarn, the yarn kind of blooms to take up the space in the fabric and creates a really nice drapey fabric that is cozy and comfortable to wear. And in fact, as soon as I finished this one, I was sort of put some thought into making another one and what color it would be. Now, I have a lot of knitting plans on the go, and that isn't something I'll do anytime soon, but I definitely love this sweater, and I think that it would be something I would definitely want to knit again. Okay, so that's what I'm wearing. How about what I've been knitting? If you recall in my previous episode, my only other episode, I was working on a cowl, the Pisces Cowl, and I finished it. I think it turned out really great. Again, this is the Pisces Cowl, and I knit it in Drops Nepal. I used a camel colorway and black, and I think it turned out really great. It definitely grew a bit on blocking, which was good, is what I wanted. I kind of stretched it out a little bit so that it would be a nice looser cowl. Now, having said that, because the yarn that I used is worsted weight, kind of a heavier yarn, it is quite a heavy cowl. This is something that would be great in the northern hemispheres in winter when it's cold out under your jacket, or maybe on a fall walk. Ooh, didn't that turn out nice? So I'm really happy with the product, but it is quite a warm sweater, so just or cowl. So just know that if you're planning on knitting one, I think it would turn out great if you knit it in something like a DK, so it would be slightly lighter. But as it is, I'm really happy with it. I love this animal print detail. I just think it's so bright. So that is my finished Pisces Cowl. What else have I been knitting? Oh, problem with cowls. Needs a little hair adjustment after. Okay. What else have I been working on? Last time we talked about some socks that I was making, probably for my husband. Definitely for my husband. Probably for Christmas. These are the Lando Socks, knit with mustache yarns. And as you can see, I have 2 tubes today. And I also have 2 heels. I think I mentioned last time that I would be using an afterthought heel technique for these socks, and that's exactly what I did. Now, somebody very kindly commented on my last video about what kind of afterthought heel I use, and so I thought I'd just give you a sort of a brief rundown on how I do it. Now, there are lots of versions of afterthought heels. Certainly there are patterns that you can purchase, there are books which talk about afterthought heels, and there's many different techniques. The one that I use is based on the SOS sock pattern by Susan B. Anderson. It's a great sock pattern. And I use that for the heel portion, but I cut a hole in my knitting. So what I do, as you can see, kind of stuck in a heel afterwards. So because I have a little bit of experience in knitting afterthought heels, I know how far I need to measure from where I started my toe to where I want to insert the heel. So for my men's socks, that tends to be 6.25 inches. For my ladies' socks, that tends to be 5.75 inches. But your mileage will vary. Depends on your foot and how long your foot is and how you like your socks to fit. So what I did with these socks, I measured 6.25 inches from where I started making my toe. And I got to sort of the division of this stripe right here. So in between this blue and this sort of a caramelly color stripe, that's where I inserted my heel. What I did was I took my needles and I picked up half of the stitches that I used to make the sock. So when I make men's socks, I tend to use 76 stitches. That seems to be the right circumference for me and my gauge and the feet in my life, I guess. So I use half of that, which is 38 stitches. Then I add 1 stitch on each side. So I picked up 40 stitches along one needle. Then I left 1 row of knitting plain, so I left that alone. And the row below that, I picked up, again, another 40 stitches. Now I use double pointed needles, so you can see, I think in some of the pictures that I will insert here, that I have 40 stitches on one needle, and then I have 20 stitches on each of the other 2 needles. The reason I have a couple of extra stitches that I pick up is to make sure that I don't have a gap at the edge of where my heels are. So right here and right over here, I want to avoid having a gap, so I pick up a couple extra stitches. Then I very carefully pick up 1 stitch in that row of plain knitting in between the stitches that I picked up. That stitch I like to have sort of somewhat in the middle of the stitches that I have on my needles, and I will snip it. Now be very careful when you're doing this, because you don't want to cut the sock that you've actually just knit. There is nothing worse than cutting into something that you've knit and realizing that was not where you were supposed to cut it. Now, that's not saying that you can't save it, but that, my friend, is a discussion for another day. Today, let's just talk about afterthought heels. Perhaps another time we will talk about saving stitches or fixing stitches, if that's something that interests you. So I snip 1 leg of a stitch in the middle of that pickup, and then I gently unwind that yarn to each end of the needles. I leave 2 stitches still live, I guess, so that when I'm knitting around the sock heel, let me see if I can. When I'm knitting around the sock heel here, I leave 2 of the stitches on either side still live on the needles. I don't pick the yarn all the way out to the edge, and that allows me to keep those edges nice and snug with no holes occurring. So once I've unwound that yarn or picked it out, then I have 2 ends on either side, which I tuck into the inside of my sock, and I'll use that to just sew up any holes that may occur later. And then I pick up my heel yarn, in this case, again, Sheepy's Metropolis in the Warsaw colorway, and I go ahead and I knit my afterthought heel. So that's how I knit my afterthought heels. Everyone's different, and certainly there's lots of tutorials and patterns you can look up online. If you've never tried this technique, I strongly recommend it. I think, again, it's great because you get this uninterrupted stripe pattern on your self-striping socks. And the astute among you will notice that the heel that I've knit in, this one here, the heel, is exactly the same as the toe that I knit. It turns out, architecturally speaking, when you're knitting socks, toes and heels are remarkably similar. Now these are socks that, I've knit this pattern many times. My husband has a number of pairs of socks with this heel, and he has never complained. So I'm not sure if that's because they're great socks or because he's a smart husband. I guess we'll leave that. We'll leave that up in the air. He can answer that question maybe. He might not want to tell me the answer. But anyway, those are my socks. They're finished. Both of them done. Both of them done. And that's one Christmas present. That's going in the pile. And I have one more project that I knit since we last spoke, and it was a bit of a surprise. Every once in a while, pattern designers will send out an email or put up a post on social media asking for test knitters. Test knitting is when you basically take somebody's pattern that they've written and you knit it, or at least read it through, and try and help them make it the most clear and the most accurate that it can be. So when you're test knitting something, you know that the pattern that you're getting isn't 100% verified yet. There may be some little tweaks that may have to happen, but it's an opportunity to get to knit something sort of before the pattern is released to the public and for purchase. And oftentimes, well, in my experience, when you do test knitting, you get the pattern for free, knowing that there are some bugs in it. Now, the pattern that I very fortunately got to test knit is one by Joji Locatelli, who's quite a famous knit designer from Argentina, Buenos Aires. This shawl that I made is a one skein shawl, which I love. Who doesn't love a one skein project for all those funny little skeins that we pick up here and there and don't have any plans for? This is a little shawl. It's a crescent shawl, and it is called the Lightweight Hipster. Now, Joji Locatelli had a Hipster cowl that's very popular, and this is sort of a version of that pattern, but in more of a scarf sort of shape. So it's a crescent shawl. It has these really, really interesting sort of crossover stitches with a lace pattern in between. It's sort of, maybe that's better to show. And then some more crossovers and some simple garter stitch. It's finished off with a cute little fringe. Woo! And it's in a sort of crescent shape, so it's quite long, but not too deep, which I find really easy to wear. Now, this is a pattern that's knit using fingering weight yarn. I used a skein of Fleece Artist. Let me just model this for you now. This is Fleece Artist yarn. It is yarn that, again, I have had in my stash for a very, very long time. It came out when Canada had its 150th birthday, so a few years ago now. And Fleece Artist dyed a bunch of colorways that were dedicated to national parks in each of the provinces, and I believe some of the territories too. So this colorway is called Banff. And Banff is the national park that I've probably spent the most time in my entire life. As a child, we would drive to the mountains, the beautiful Rocky Mountains in Western Canada, and spend summers there. We'd make trips in the winter. As an adult, I've very tentatively learned how to ski. I'm not a great skier, but I still love going to the mountains at any time of year. They're just beautiful for hiking, for wandering, for relaxing. And this colorway has sort of the colors reminiscent of that beautiful national park. So these really sort of vibrant tealy colors are the colors of the lakes in the mountains, beautiful glacier-fed lakes. There's a deep, deep forest green, reminiscent of the forests in the mountains, and then blacks and grays for the mountains themselves. So I was really, really delighted to be able to use this skein to make a really, really pretty little shawl that I think will make a lovely Christmas gift if I don't end up stealing it myself. This is how I think I would wear it, but to each their own. Very cozy and very pretty. This pattern, the Lightweight Hipster shawl, is a pattern that probably won't come out for a little while. When designers have patterns test knit, they often have a number of things on the go. So they will wait to hear back from the various knitters who've had an opportunity to knit this pattern. They'll incorporate any of their suggestions into the pattern and then publish it at their own convenience. So I look forward to seeing Hoki publish this pattern, and I'm just delighted that I got an opportunity to knit it. And I just really enjoyed it. The yarn, the pattern was really great. And now it has me looking at my stash to see if there's any other one skeins that might make a really great little cowl or shawl, say it right. And that's what I've been knitting this week. I have a couple of patterns or projects that I've been working on that are not finished. One of them is the Secret Handshape Cowl that I talked about last time. This is a pattern by Casapinka. It is a mystery knit along, which means that every week you get a portion of the pattern, and that allows you to sort of knit a portion every week. It's always a surprise. And this pattern has various different stitch patterns. I think I showed you the yarn that I was using. So I have this beautiful sweet Georgia cashmere with sparkle base. I have the pretty pink from Homespun House that's based on the High Inquisitor or Dolores Umbridge. I remembered. This variegated color was the yarn that I used to make my beret from last week. And then I have this beautiful teal that's a Woolmiza. Now the pattern itself has been fun to knit. Every week you get a little bit of, a little piece of it. And I've enjoyed the different stitch patterns. But what I haven't loved is my yarn selection. Now, it's okay. It's not terrible. But in some places I wish that there was more, I had more contrast between the colors that I've chosen. So for example, right in here, there really isn't very much contrast between the two colors, and so you don't get a lot of stitch definition. Now that's not a terrible thing. To each their own, and everybody has their own sort of preferences when it comes to the colors that they've picked. But this one I'm afraid that I don't know that I'm necessarily in love with it. But I'm currently on the third clue. So the first week I think went up to here, and then the second week were these sort of wavy patterns, and then some slip stitches and a little bit of lace. This week I started in with some knits and pearls, which don't show up very well in the color combinations that I have. And now I'm doing sort of a thorn stitch up here. So there's only 1 week left. I'm not going to give up on this project just because the colors that I've chosen aren't necessarily really speaking to me at this moment. I'd like to see it finished, and then I'll, I guess, reserve judgment. I think that worst case scenario, this is a lovely cowl that might make some really nice donation knitting. I might see if anyone that I know is really in love with these colors. I find that sometimes you're more critical of something that you're making, whereas somebody who maybe doesn't knit much or doesn't have, who maybe isn't crafty or doesn't feel confident to do different stitches, or who just hasn't seen this pattern, might really be in love with it, and I'm fine with that. I'm not disparaging it. I think the pattern's great. I think my yarn selection could have been better, but I'm willing to wait it out and see how it ends up. And worst case scenario, I think that somebody somewhere would love to have this to keep them warm. So whether that's me or somebody I know or someone who could really use some warmth this winter, either way, I think that it will go to a great home. So that is my Secret Handshake Cowl. And I have 1 more week, so hopefully it will be finished the next time we talk. Now I have 1 more project on the needles, and that is a pair of socks. I seem to always have a pair of socks on the needles, and this is one that I was talking about last time, I think. Amy Florence of the Stranded Podcast is having a festive sock along that I wanted to take part in. And I mean, I do have Christmas yarns. I have plenty of Christmas yarns. But I chose something that is sort of Christmassy without being Christmassy, if you know what I mean. Now, this is the Ugly Sweater Party colorway. It's a colorway by Wool Baron, who I think I talked a lot about last week. Now, so far I've done 12 stripes of this self-striping yarn, and I have not gotten back to the beginning yet. So this colorway has a lot of different colors going on. I'll just give you a peek at the ball so you can get an idea that as much as I've knit here, there's still some reds, some peaches, some grays, I think some more greens, before I get back to the beginning again. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this colorway knits up. The other thing I mentioned last time was trying some different heels in my socks that might work really well with self-striping yarns. We've talked a little bit about afterthought heels and how much I like them for not interrupting a colorway and keeping a nice clean line. But sometimes the knitter wants something different. And so today I am sticking in, I've only just begun, a German heel. German heels are not something I'm super familiar with, but it's something I'm going to give a try in these socks. Now the reading I've done for a German heel tells me that we use for a German heel more than half of the stitches of the sock. Generally a sock is knit on half the stitches of the sock. For this one you use slightly more than half the stitches, which means the heel will sort of cup around your foot a little bit more. When it's done, you don't have as much of a gusset. So it shouldn't, in theory, interrupt my stripe pattern as much as a normal heel flap and gusset. Do I know that for sure? No. But I'm willing to roll the dice on these socks. Because you know what? Even if the striping pattern on these socks is interrupted a bit, I think they're still going to be super fun. I will wear them all the time. I'm using my favorite gray Sheepy's Metropolis in the Warsaw colorway for the heels, cuffs, and toes. And I will let you know how that pans out. Hopefully by next week I'll have at least one sock done and we can have a look and see how the German heel panned out. Now, in the last couple weeks since we spoke, I did have a yarn delivery to my home. So exciting. I tend not to buy, I should be careful, these words may come back to bite me. I was going to say I tend not to buy a ton of yarn, but sometimes yarn just speaks to you and you need to order it. So let me just show you what I received in the mail. It's a sock kit, and this sock kit is made by Leo and Roxy. Isn't that fun? I just love this. So when I saw this sock kit originally, I think on Instagram, I was really intrigued by it. I loved the pattern, the sock, but they had sold out, and so I was out of luck, which is fine because, like I said, I have a lot of yarn. It's not like I'm going to go without knitting. The title of this podcast is Jolene Knits a Lot, so obviously I'm not going to go without yarn. But I was perusing Instagram a couple weeks ago, and she had a pre-order. So I jumped and I purchased this kit. This, I think, is the Flamingo kit. It's the Marled Sock Kit. It's an 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon, with two contrast colors, the Flamingo pink and a cream color. Now this kit came with a pattern, which I think is super thoughtful, and I'll just give you a sort of glimpse at what the pattern looks like without revealing the juicy details. But aren't those great? It's like a work sock, but with hot pink stripe at the top. Maybe a hot pink stripe at the toe too, if I'm feeling very adventurous. And I just think they're going to be great socks. So pretty. Who's not going to like them? They'll go with everything. So this is my treat yourself for this last couple weeks, which I'm quite delighted about. And now for a new segment on the Jolene Knits a Lot podcast, episode number 2. I talked a little bit about cocktails, and there was, I'm not going to lie, a little bit of interest in the comments. So I thought I would share with you a cocktail that might be good for fall time or maybe into the winter. In Canada, it's currently Thanksgiving time. We celebrate our Thanksgiving earlier than in the United States, and it's usually the second weekend in October. This is the time when farmers are all working very hard, harvesting. Most of us have pulled in our garden or are trying desperately to pull in our garden so that we don't have anything freezing. And the weather's starting to get cold. It's definitely fall here. And it's when we celebrate the things that we're most grateful for. So having said that, because it is Thanksgiving, I thought that I would make a cranberry old-fashioned. Now, cocktails that I like to drink tend to be relatively simple. I don't like cocktails with a really long list of ingredients because I just find that sort of off-putting. I just want something sort of more straightforward, generally speaking, unless I'm feeling super fancy. So today's cocktail is the cranberry old-fashioned. To you. Cranberry old-fashioned is quite a straightforward drink. It's based on an old-fashioned beverage, which you may or may not be familiar with. It starts with a cranberry simple syrup. Simple syrup tends to be a 1-to-1 mixture of sugar and water, heated until the sugar dissolves, and then kept in the fridge for all your cocktail needs. Now, cranberry simple syrup is slightly different. The recipe I found has you use 2 cups of water, 1 cup sugar, and 1 cup cranberries. I used frozen cranberries. They work just fine, but you could also use fresh cranberries if you have them on hand. Now, mix the water, the sugar, and the cranberries in a pot and bring to a boil for 4 to 5 minutes, and then let that mixture cool. You've got your cranberry simple syrup. I strained my cranberry simple syrup into a jar that I'm going to keep in the fridge for cocktail needs. But it's important to let that cool before you make your drink. So once you have your cranberry simple syrup, we will mix in a cocktail glass of your choosing 2 ounces of bourbon. I like Maker's Mark, but there's lots of delicious bourbons out there that would be just fine in this cocktail. So use your favorite if you have one. If not, it's totally fine to wing it or buy Maker's Mark and let me know what you think. So 2 ounces of Maker's Mark bourbon, 1 ounce of cranberry simple syrup, 3 dashes of Angostura bitters, served on ice with some frozen cranberries for garnish. Oh, that's lovely. I highly recommend this beverage. It's sort of Thanksgiving-y with the cranberries. It's sweet. It's not super, it doesn't have a lot of bite to it. Sometimes people find, I think, cocktails with straight bourbon to be kind of too strong for drinking. But I think that the simple syrup, also served on ice with a splash of water if you're finding it a little bit too strong, makes a delightful cocktail. I think I'll be drinking these for Thanksgiving and probably into the Christmas festive season. So cheers. The cranberry old-fashioned. Now, something that I've gotten a little bit into the habit of lately is writing gratitude lists or things that I'm grateful for. And I think that given Thanksgiving here in Canada, it's especially poignant, timely, to talk about some of the things that we're grateful for. I think that making a practice of making things that we're grateful for has made me more of a positive thinker. It makes me look in my day for things that I can be grateful for, and it makes me look for the good things in life instead of the things that get you down. So today, I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my friends. I'm very grateful for my knitting, which has gotten me through a lot of hard times and also brings me great joy. And I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful that you took some time to join me today to knit a little bit or just watch vicariously, perhaps with a cocktail. I'm really grateful that you took some time to spend with me today. I hope that if you like this episode, you'll click the like and subscribe button so that we can knit, possibly drink again sometime soon. I hope that in the next couple weeks you find time to do the things that bring you joy. I know that I plan on knitting a lot. Bye.